Following up on the laws of motion perspective, let's explore beginnings and endings from the perspective of warming up and cooling down. You're probably already somewhat aware of the importance of warming up and cooling down in the physical sense as it relates to exercise and playing sport, where, before engaging in physical activity, it's crucial to do a brief 10-minute warm-up to prepare your body both physically and mentally for the activity to follow. The aim here is to loosen up your muscles by raising your body temperature and increasing blood flow to your working muscles. A cool down after physical activity, depending on your intensity, is arguably not as necessary, but it is still nevertheless important for helping to return your mind and body to pre-exercise levels. The aim of a cool down is to remove waste products from your muscles more quickly so that you don't feel as sore or stiff after the physical activity. More importantly, let's explore the concept of warming up and cooling down as it applies to your mind in terms of getting into the rhythm or the flow of things. For example, getting the flow of your thoughts going. The reason it's absolutely crucial for you to always warm up, that is to say, to stretch out your mind before any activity or work, is so that you can be at your best. This is because warming up before any activity helps you to reach a state of peak performance known as the flow state so much more seamlessly. In this regard, warming up is a must because in so many ways, your muscles, both physically and mentally, are like tight, inelastic rubber bands that naturally want to resist movement because action feels uncomfortable to them in the beginning. This helps to explain why, before you begin any undertaking, your muscles, in their inert, static state, tend to be very rigid and resistant towards movement or being stretched out. This is because of the inertia of resistance, where, in the beginning, your mind is naturally reluctant or resistant towards getting going or getting into the rhythm of things, aka getting into the flow of things. An added benefit of warming up is that it gives your mind and your body a chance to get familiar with the activity to follow, so that you're well acquainted before you really get going. On the other hand, you have the cool down phase. The cool down, or the end, is all about tapering off and regulating the momentum of your phlegmatic or peaks heightened state of awareness and focus. The cool down, in the form of the ending, requires you to wind things up, to pull the plug, and to moderate your excitement, your inspiration in the form of enthusiasm, eagerness, and your willingness, as well as to moderate your comfort, contentment, and feelings of ease. This is a much simpler and more straightforward process that comes down to timing or listening to what your mind and body are telling you in terms of dwindling inspiration, energy, and fatigue levels. You always want to listen to the wisdom of your mind and body so that you don't overdo it and thus feel too tired or burnt out thereafter as a result. In essence, the principle of warming up and cooling down can be understood in terms of the energy it takes to get a ball rolling or moving from its standstill position, and then getting it to slow down or regulating its momentum to bring it to a stop again. Following this, let's zoom out to the bigger picture so that you can understand why beginnings are so inherently difficult. Getting started in the beginning is hard because the process of getting warmed up requires deliberate effort on your part. You need to use up a considerable amount of energy in order to overcome the inertia of your reluctance or your resistance. This resistance comes in the form of discomfort, unease, awkwardness, not being in the mood, where you're uninspired or unmotivated, and so on and so forth. For this reason, the beginning, the first step of doing anything, always seems harder and more daunting than it actually is, and this is due to the natural laws of inertia and gravity. Your first step to overcoming this difficulty in the form of inertia is to simply acknowledge the reality that the toughest, scariest moment is always just before you begin, and after that, things can only get better. This principle of rough beginnings and the challenges that come with warming up, especially to others, happens in almost all the areas of your life. This is especially the case when you're dealing with the new, the unknown, or the unfamiliar. Take, for example, the tension and excitement, or nerves, if you will, that you naturally feel on the first day of meeting new strangers at school, at work, or even out in public. Strangers who may even soon become your close acquaintances, friends, or even lovers. The tension and excitement, or even nerves, that follow rough beginnings seems to stem from a deep-seated subconscious desire on your part to want to make the best first impressions on others. When dealing with rough beginnings, the concept of warming up gradually through the power of chunking comes in really handy for helping you to overcome the inertia of resistance, which is inherent in beginnings. When it comes to overcoming the inertia of resistance, progress is initially slow. So you begin with the first small step, then you move on to the second step, then the third step, and then the next step, and so on and so forth, until you finally gain some initial traction or momentum. Once you are able to gain enough traction to get into the rhythm or flow of things, then you're able to accomplish what you want quite effortlessly. Now, to apply all the principles that you've learned so far in terms of warming up, let's look at one of the most effective ways for you to get into the flow of things. In order to get into the flow state most seamlessly, you need to use the 90-second rule in the form of the 90-second Pomodoro timer. The 90-second rule is one of the most important time-based rules that you will ever come across. This is because the rule applies the power of chunking to make doing and not doing anything and everything so much more easier and streamlined. The 90-second rule is a supremely versatile rule that can apply to so many areas of your life. I'll elaborate on the other use cases sometime in the future, for example, the habits and how you can apply it to your routine. But for now, let's use the 90-second rule in this modified, chunked down version of the Pomodoro timer. So, before you start doing anything and everything, be it physically, mentally, or socially, and so on, use a 90-second timer to force yourself to do it for only 90 seconds, then 5 minutes, and finally 15-minute chunks at a time. Then take a brief 90-second to 5-minute break to positively reinforce your action until you get into the flow of things. Once you do get into the rhythm of things, just go with the flow and continue working thereafter until you actually need a well-deserved break. The goal is to use the 90-second Pomodoro timer habitually every time you need to get yourself warmed up before doing or starting any task. You want to get warmed up so that you can perform at your best. Your best is when you are at your peak, where the flow state kicks in and you are in the flow of things. To demonstrate how the 90-second Pomodoro timer can be used, let's take doing work as an example. Work in the form of a difficult, dreaded, or even overwhelming task. First of all, what you want to do is to get started by doing only 90 seconds of work. For this first 90-second chunk, I recommend that you briefly look at all the materials or files you'll need to work with, then take a 90-second break. Note, during your breaks, take the time to look away from your screen or your task and look at something that is quite pleasant. Use your break to mindfully look around and observe your surroundings, or if this is not possible, simply admire your wallpaper, your background, or whatever else. Then when your break is done, set the timer for 5 minutes of work and then take a 90-second break after you're done. Repeat this 5-minute 90-second cycle until you get into the flow and the task becomes so much more easier to do. After this, you can also move up from the 5 minutes of work to 15 minutes of work, followed with a complementary 90-second or even 5-minute break until you get into the flow of things. Once you do overcome the inertia of resistance and gain some momentum, aka get warmed up, simply go with the flow until you can't no more. So, in summary, the formula to effectively getting into the flow of things is to start by doing only 90 seconds of work, then take a well-deserved 90-second break. Then move on to 5 minutes of work with a 90-second break, 15 minutes of work with a 90-second to 5-minute break. Repeat this 5-minute or 15-minute cycle until you get into the flow state, and then just continue working without the timer thereafter. The practical takeaway from this section on gradually warming up is to always start by doing the bare minimum, doing what is necessary so that you can gain some initial positive encouragement in the form of warming up and gaining some momentum. Warming up is all about doing what is possible so that once you do get into the flow or rhythm of things, you will find that you're doing that which you once or at first thought was impossible. In summary, getting into the habit of warming yourself up before you begin any undertaking is a very important and high leverage practice because once you do gain some initial traction and overcome the inertia of resistance, you'll be able to compound or multiply your progress by simply going with the flow. In the next section, I'll use the flow graph and the analogy of a rocket ship, as well as the ascent up and descent down a mountain in the form of climbing your own metaphorical mountain to illustrate these ideas further to you. These examples will help you to better understand, appreciate, and contextualize how beginnings and endings are always the most difficult and challenging parts, especially when it comes to warming up and cooling down.